Everybody.
Hello? How are you?
No, I'm good. Is my audio clear?
Yes. Yeah. Hi, Devansh.
Hey, Devansh.
Hi, Ankit. Hi, sir.
Hey.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, your audio is clear. So you just shared that video with me. Can you, well, when we get to it, can you share your screen in the meeting here?
Yeah, sure.
But not now. We'll just do it like in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So, cool enough. So, I have my exams day after tomorrow, so, yeah.
Okay.
Mid-semester exams. But I think it was important to attend the meeting because of the conference thing and some of the changes that I made in the paper.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go over that.
Cool. So, next, let's meet for people.
Yeah. Actually, while we're waiting, why don't we see the video?
So, I'll present.
Okay, yeah, present your screen. It's Jesse. Hi, Jesse.
Okay. So, I'll be presenting my screen. This is the thing. Can everyone see?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually the 7th slide of my presentation.
Okay, yeah.
So this has a text like saying what is happening and the simulations that are there.
Okay.
So you make the GIF of this and then we can use that as you said.
Yeah, I can convert it from here. So yeah, I got it in the Slack channel. I just couldn't open it on my phone, so I wanted to see what it was. Yeah. So yeah, that looks good. Yeah, and then it's it's of a fairly high quality, so that should be good. Yeah, because people are going to open it up and they're going to want it to be high quality, so that's good. So welcome to the meeting. We have a number of things to talk about today. We have the paper, of course, and thanks for everyone who's been contributing to the paper. Jesse and Ankit have been putting in comments and making revisions. Z has also done a lot of revisions, which I incorporated. So thank you, Z. If you show up, I'll thank you in person. But and then I was working on it last night, and I saw Jesse was up late working on it. So we'll go to that. And then we also have the Twitter conference abstract that we need to get finalized today. I want to submit it this coming week. And then we have a couple papers I wanted to go over just briefly. We did this in the DevaWorm group, and I think it's kind of interesting just to go over a couple papers really briefly and just kind of go through them. So I've got this. I guess the first thing we'll do is the papers. Let's see. I have a folder to share. Oh, this is Stefan. Hi, Stefan. Just in time.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you doing?
All right. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. There you go. Here's the link to the papers on Google Drive. Now, let me see if I can share my screen. So these are a couple papers that I've run across in the past week or so that might be of interest to the group. Okay. So the first paper is this paper that Jesse actually found online. It's called Natural Selection Finds Natural Gradient. And it's the last author on it is Carl Friston, who is a very prolific neuroimaging person. And he's published a lot of papers in basically neuroimaging, but also in this area he calls the free energy principle of brain activity. And so in this paper, they talk about that theory. It's basically the idea that cognition emerges from the conservation of free energy and some other physics type ideas. And he's kind of tried to put it into a framework for brains. It is reminiscent of a lot of the complexity theory that was going on in maybe the 60s and 70s. So it comes from a tradition of that, but it's sort of oriented towards cognition in the brain. So in this paper, they talk about active inference, which is when you try to figure out what's going on in the world and you make decisions. And they talk about this being a plausible process theory of brain function. And so they get into some of this free energy principle. So they think of neuronal dynamics for state estimation, which means like a neural state or a cognitive state, in terms of a gradient descent model on free energy. So they use the gradient descent model, which is a landscape, and they look for minima in that landscape, and that's the minimization of free energy. It's a very statistical physics type approach to this problem. And I think Jesse presented a paper last summer where they talked about dynamical systems. And they talked about using, like landscapes or some sort of gradient descent surface to model a lot of this, a lot of these dynamics that are going on in the brain. Basically, if you have a landscape or a surface, you boil everything down to this surface, and it's a three-dimensional surface. It may be a very highly multidimensional problem, and you can find sort of patterns on that surface, like orbits around a minima, or things that dwell in a minima, or something like that. And that would be the way you would determine what the states are in the brain. And so, it's a very difficult theory because a lot of people have talked about it. Not a lot of people really understand it. So, I mean, this is just something that in people reviewing the theory have mentioned, that it's not straightforward at all. It's very complicated. And theories maybe shouldn't be so complicated, but, it's an interesting take, and I would read it if I were you. He argues that neuronal dynamics approximate a natural gradient descent, which is kind of what people argue in AI, that learning is gradient descent, or that some sort of, intelligence is basically gradient descent. So it does bridge the gap between sort of biology and biological intelligence and artificial intelligence. So they go through this theory, but this application of the theory. Let's see if there are any figures I can point to. Oh, there's variational free energy. That's a key concept in this literature. And so they talk about this in terms of sort of a Bayesian model. So let's see. Oh, here's an example where they actually map local field potentials, which are things that you can record from the brain, from neurons, and they exist in a space that allows you to demonstrate this principle of free energy minimization. And so you have this phase space or this landscape, and you try to find the minimum point in it. And they're arguing, I guess, that local field potentials can be mapped to this sort of model and explained using that model. And so I would actually, if Jesse, you're going to probably present on this in more detail. So I'll leave that up to you. But I just wanted to point that out. What was that?
I was going to say, most of the people that I know don't really know how to talk about it. I was originally exposed to active inference like a while ago, and I attended a sort of distributed like a journal club about it, and I wasn't that involved because it was mostly in Boston, but it comes up a lot, and it references. I'm interested in it because it does reference a lot of some of it, like a lot of things that you're recycling some interesting past stuff, but it's really kind of esoteric, and I definitely agree. Maybe theory shouldn't be that complicated, but at the same time, it's an intriguing thing to be able to sort of reference. So I'm looking forward to kind of taking a deeper dive into the paper, which I definitely haven't done yet. But it's I don't know. It's one of those things that it seems important to kind of know about because a lot of people are talking about it, or more so trying to talk about it, or more so trying to reference it when they explain those things. So I'll look forward to going more into that later.
Yeah. I mean, one way to do this too, if it seems inscrutable, is to maybe pick a couple of key concepts and just, or even just like take parts of the theory that you understand and lay them out, and then say, this is what we really kind of understand, this is what we don't understand. I mean, that might be a way to do it too, because I think it would be useful for a lot of people. Because I think if people never really want to admit that they don't understand something a lot of times, like they like to say that they understand it and then they don't, or they're they kind of gloss over a lot of the key points. So it makes sense to like really kind of and I agree that theory really should be pretty simple. If good theories really have a shorthand, like natural selection, natural selection kind of has a shorthand. I mean, people get it wrong sometimes, but it has it's not that hard to understand. You don't even need mathematics really to understand it. But that's the kind of thing. So I mean, those are kind of issues too with it. Is sort of the philosophical aspect of do you really need to have a really complicated theory, and is it useful? But those are things too. I think that those would be very interesting to a lot of people because, again, people don't like to admit that they don't really understand it. But I've seen people online talk about how it's sort of I don't really understand it, but it must be good, which isn't really a great thing to say. But anyways, I look forward to maybe having some future conversations about this. So let me get on to the next paper. So the next paper I found was a paper it's an old paper, I think it was unpublished, by Alan Turing, and it's called Intelligent Machinery. And this is a nice paper because he lays out a couple of things having to do with the Turing test and something he calls B-unorganized machines. And B-unorganized machines are sort of a very early stab at neural networks. So if you're interested in sort of the origins of neural networks, or maybe some of the paths it could have taken other than the standard neural networks that we have now, this may be the paper for you. So he talks about the possible ways in which machinery might be made to show intelligent behavior are discussed. The analogy of the human brain is used as a guiding principle. And then he goes on to talk about, people have been trying to emulate Cortex, since the 1940s. And so he gets kind of into some of these issues. This is, of course, was written in the 1940s and was well before any of the modern sort of ideas about neural networks were proposed, but even really before a lot of computer science occurred. And so this is a good, this was unpublished, and I found it somewhere, and I thought it was really interesting because he kind of gets into some of the stuff about talks about computers. He talks about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. And he talks a little bit about that in terms of intelligence. And then he talks about varieties of machinery. So he talks about discrete and continuous machinery. So you have discrete machines and continuous machines, controlling machines and active machines. And he has this typology of machinery for intelligence, or machinery that exhibits intelligent behavior. So he goes through this, and then he gets into this idea of how many states can an intelligent system have, or a discrete machine. And so this is an exercise in figuring out how many states there are in a given type of machine. And that's, of course, going to be important in computer science, because in computer science, when we build a representation of something, we want to know how many possible states it can have. And then he talks about, okay, so this is logical computing machines. And this is where he talks about these B unorganized machines. And so he kind of gets into logical computing machines. So he's kind of laying out some of the same arguments he lays out for the Turing test. So he talks about how you might set up like a intelligent machine using a tape. And then he talks about logical computing machines and kind of lays out the basis for them. And then he talks about practical computing machines. And then he talks about going to these unorganized machines. And so this is the part where he lays out this idea of a B unorganized machine. And this is what it is right here. And it looks actually like a Markov model in a way, but it's not really a Markov model. It's something between a Markov model and a neural network. And so, you have a Markov model where you have discrete states, which are these circles, and you have transitions between the states, or the circles, which are these arrows. And you can transition to the same state. That's what these loops are. So it's very much like a Markov model where you have this sort of, undirected or semi-directed state change from one state to another. But it's sort of like a neural network in that it can sort of encode information and show a pattern of activity and things like that. So that's what he gets into with this. And remember, this is like between sort of like the mathematics of discrete mathematics and then full-blown computer science. So he's kind of in that transition period, and he's actually doing a lot of laying the groundwork for a lot of modern computer science in this. So it's a very interesting paper. So it's good to look back in history and see how things kind of developed, and think about how, if they didn't develop this way, how might they have developed. I think this is, it's very good. It's very long, though. So, any comments on that?
Yeah, which year is it paper?
This one is
Something.
I think it was from the early 40s. I mean, they have like his birth and death date here, but I think the paper itself was from the 40s, maybe the late 30s. It doesn't really have a date on it, but it's, wait a minute. They have a date on this. Yeah, he talks about starting 1937, so it's after 1937, but before maybe 1950. So it's in that time period.
Yeah, I guess at that time it was the origin of all these things.
Yeah.
Like models in the computer science and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a lot of the stuff like, a lot of there was discrete mathematics before there was computer science. And so a lot of the ideas came out of discrete mathematics, or like Gödel, who was a mathematician, contemporary of Einstein. And he talked a lot about like how you can't necessarily describe the world with axioms. You have to be, you can't rely on axioms to describe the world, to give a complete description of a system or the world. And so, we have to account for that in our models of the world. There was, in the 19th century, people were sort of believed with great faith that you could use axioms. If you just used enough axioms, you could fully describe, the world or phenomena. And that turned out not to be the case. And so that, that plays a role in a lot of modern computer science too. And that's why we use representations that might be incomplete, but they have to be, it's the only way you can do it in a way that's tractable. And it's interesting with computer science is that it allows you to put a lot of these mathematical ideas into a machine and like make them sort of practical. So it's like you have this mathematical model, and it looks good, but then when you try to run it, you find out that it doesn't run because it's either an implausible description of things because you try to overspecify everything. It's like kind of like extreme overfitting in machine learning, or you have this sort of it's insufficiently descriptive. So it's really kind of a computer science is really kind of a way to test discrete mathematics or any kind of mathematics. So.
Yeah, but for instance, the Markov chains have proven themselves to be pretty useful in some kind of questions, especially in bioinformatics, for instance.
Oh yeah.
Like we did this CPG islands prediction using Markov models, even hidden Markov models, where you can also you can build upon it and do some stuff like predicting, something called posteriority decoding, where you try to predict the states which emitted this or that symbol, based on the probabilities of emitting the symbols of some different states. So we use this in multiple sequence alignment, for instance.
Oh yeah. And they're intelligent machines themselves. I mean, it's interesting that people use Markov models in a way that's like highly practical, but we don't think of it as like the basis for intelligence. We just kind of use it, but it is intelligent because it's able to find patterns in data.
Yeah.
We don't think of it yeah. Yeah. Well, so you can take a look at that. And then the last paper we have is this is a little bit more practical. This is something that recently came out. So there's a language called Julia, and it's a scientific programming language. So I don't know how many of you have heard of Julia.
I totally support Julia. So okay, Julia is just perfect.
Yeah. So this is actually something that was published in Nature, and it's on giving a Julia primer to scientists who might want to use it for their research. And it's really good because it gives you a Z, actually. Okay. Hi, Z. So I was just talking about this primer on Julia. It's so this is sort of laid out for scientists. So programmers, mathematicians, programmers might be pretty up to speed on it, but a lot of people doing scientific computing might not be. And so they talk about the benefits of it. It's a good language for modeling and for other types of scientific computing. And then they give you these resources. So the resources here, let's see if you can zoom in on them. You can go set up an environment at julialang.org. You have debuggers, you have other tools, you have a kernel for writing Julia code in Jupyter notebooks. And then a number of things. So they've kind of packaged it for people here. Get help. They have a Slack team, a discourse group, and then they have these Julia notebooks, which kind of do a demo of the different things that the language can do. And so, I mean, they're selling Julia as like a highly reproducible language. So like you might use a piece of code to do an analysis, but you don't want to rewrite it, and you want to be able to share it. If you publish a paper, you want to share your code so that people, maybe somewhere else in the world can run that code and do the same type of analysis. So that's really kind of one of the goals of like reproducibility. And Julia does make that easier. Technically, all computer languages should be like that, but it isn't quite that way because, it's hard for people to know like what the syntax is, and, you might run differently on different machines. So they were actually talking about Python here. Python is user friendly, but it's not like doesn't have the speed that you need for sort of hardcore scientific computing. And I know like Stefan does a lot of bioinformatics, so he's definitely used to these issues. Would you like to add anything about that, or?
Yeah, sure. So first about the speed of Julia, it's basically really high performance language because, well, like put it in simple words, all of the code that you write in Julia is getting compiled to an LLVM compiler, so-called. That means that it achieves the speed of C and C++, basically, which makes it like really, really performant. So they've like implemented a lot of inbuilt function, like base functions, how they call them. Something that included in the Julia language is getting translated to the LLVM compatible language, which is basically a compiler for C++. And that's why all of this function, they achieve the speed of C++, basically, or C. Yeah, so it's really performant. And about the code reuse, there is this one feature of Julia, which is multiple dispatch. If you read about it on the internet, there are like tons of articles just saying stating that it's the main and the most important feature of the Julia language. And well, it's pretty hard to explain like in 2 words what it is, but it allows for really great code reusability. And what is also good about Julia is that if you miss some functionality, you can easily add it just by writing your own function. So you don't have to inherit from some classes that are already there, which makes it then kind of pretty big. Like your code base is pretty complicated because if you extend from some class, then you change the architecture of this class, and like you can't easily share this extension of yours with somebody else. But this multiple dispatch feature of Julia makes it really easy to allow the other people to use your pieces of code in their own analysis, and also use others' pieces of code in your own analysis. And that's what's really good. And so this is why Julia is so reusable. And on the other hand, there's of course a really, really big open source community, last but not least. And like people are totally amused by the fact that like if you miss some functionality in some library, which is already there, for instance, some plotting library, you like open the issue, and the guys there are very active usually. So you get like reply in some 24 hours something from a person which is like ready to tackle down this issue with you, and you can easily introduce your own patch, and they like they're actively responding and actively checking and reviewing the code, or maybe adding some other features if you need them.
Yeah,
so yeah, that makes the language pretty flexible, performant, and reusable for scientific purposes, and that's why I really like it as a scientific language.
Yeah. Let me share the folder again for these papers. So I have 3 papers here. If you want to read them, you can go ahead and let me see if this will. All right.
Could you also put them in Slack?
Yeah, I can put them in Slack. Alright. I'll put them in Slack later today, or later after the meeting. So there's the drive again, the drive address. And next order of business then is to go to the Twitter conference abstract. So everyone can see my screen. And this is the abstract. We've got a couple of comments from Z, from Jesse, from Ankit. So I just wanted to go over this again, make sure, because I want to submit this week to get it, in before the deadline. I might get a little busy towards the deadline. I don't want to leave it. Actually, the deadline's Friday, so I want to get it in a couple days before the deadline. So this is the developmental Breitenberg vehicles. So this is a little bit different than the paper abstract, but it's very similar. If you want to modify this, please do so by Wednesday, because I think I'm going to submit on Wednesday. We have the title, developmental Breitenberg vehicles, so we kind of give it a DBV designation instead of BVs. And then kind of, in this case, we're selling it as neuroethology. And so neuroethology is a study of brain and behavior in the context of a natural environment, but then it's a simulation that we're talking about, so we have to put in another sentence here that sort of makes that clear. We're actually two sentences. And the argument here is that if you have a behavioral simulation, you can approximate naturalism through this sort of embodied approach and, having a controlled environment. And then this is kind of similar to the paper. We'll use a type of Breitenberg vehicle called developmental Breitenberg vehicles to model the developmental aspects of an embodied artificial nervous system. And then this is where we talk about the different instantiations. And again, I think we talked about this last week about the slides that we'll need. So I'm not sure if we have this publicly, but I can put it up. I think I have it on GitHub, and maybe we'll talk about it next week or the week after in terms of how we want to set up the presentation. But I think we have it somewhere where we have each slide. So I think it was just basically that we were going to do an intro slide, maybe a slide about sort of the premise of this, naturalistic behavior and observation, and then some each person who did an instantiation, Ankit, Stefan, and Z, will do a slide on your platform, and then we'll do one on use cases, and then a summary slide, which kind of links to the paper, which should be out by then as a preprint. We link to that, we say for more information, and then that's the whole thing. So it's not that difficult to organize. It's just this abstract. I think it's pretty tight, and it looks good to me. I mean, I don't know. I incorporated comments from other people. So take a look at it. Let me put the link in the chat. Take a look at it if you think that there's anything that you want to suggest changing. Please do so by Wednesday morning. So it'll basically be Tuesday. Yeah, I want to get that out of the way. I have something on Thursday I need to do, so I don't think I'm going to be able to do anything Friday. So, let's see. So, okay, that's the abstract, and okay, it doesn't have to be that long, but they want to have a good description. Then the next order a bit. Any questions or comments on the abstract?
Just wanted to go over so it's just the written abstract, and we basically have that done by Wednesday, the last page of that.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think I have a lot to add to it right now, but I'll look at it again. I know I looked at it before. I don't know if I made a comment on it. I'm if this was on GitHub or it was only in this document, but I'll have more questions about the slides and stuff later. But just for the abstract right now. Go with that for Wednesday. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And I think it was like that second sentence, which I made into two sentences, and so I get it. Yeah. Especially if you don't understand something, please say, because it's probably not understandable. If not everyone understands. That's always a good standard if you're proofreading something. If someone says I don't understand it, it's probably not understandable. So it's worth looking at again.
Yeah. We would break this abstract into 6 parts, and thereafter we'll put the GIFs or something like that later on.
Yeah, so we're gonna have like a 240 character. We could think of it as a slide. We'll have 240 characters to say something, and then we'll have an image. So the image is, they always say like a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we want to be able to make our image speak, much more loudly than it otherwise would, because you're going to have this tweet that's like a small number of characters. You can't really put a lot of text, but then you have this image, and it should show something about your platform, your software, and then say, give maybe like a screenshot, or we could do a GIF animation, or not too much text on the image, but like something that really kind of is visually descriptive. So
something that I presented just before the call, or I sent it to you. So does it look like suitable for this Twitter thing, or should I like save it for the presentation or something?
Oh yeah, we could use that. We can use that an approach like that. We can do we can just put that GIF up, and it'll show because it'll show it going, the sort of the simulation in action. So we'll have that. I think it'll be pretty good. It'll be pretty impressive. Z says, do we make separate slides or create shared Google slides? Yeah, I'll probably create a shared slide deck. So we'll have them all in one place, and then we'll put our things in there, and it'll just be we might have an image, and then we might have some text, and we'll edit the text in the meeting, and then the day of the conference, I'll do the tweets from my account, and I'll have it all set up. So you just take the text and you put it down. Actually, you can do scheduled tweets, but I'd rather do it by hand. It would just be where I would copy that, paste it, and then send tweet, and then 90 seconds later, do another one. And it's weird because you don't get a lot of feedback immediately, but you want to let people read it and absorb it, and then go to the next one. But we have to edit the text very carefully to make sure it fits into 240 characters, and then we also want to edit the images. So we'll have a shared slide deck, but I'll set that up. Maybe if you want to create your own slide, and then in 2 weeks we'll create a shared slide deck, and I'll put it into that, and then we can have the whole thing in one slide deck, so we can keep track of everything. And then Stefan says, go ahead.
So with this abstract, we have to the recording that I just made. So should I give you day after tomorrow, or later on? Is it required?
Oh, you can give it to me as soon as you want, or as soon as possible. Yeah. So I can just put I can put
and just give it to you as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then Stefan said in the chat, I am done with my exam, so I'll add to my comments until he'll add his comments by Wednesday. So look forward to that. All right, so that was the abstract. Let's go back to the. Actually, why don't we talk? Jesse and I are working on the CI 2020, so this is collective intelligence, and I just wanted to get to this for maybe a couple minutes.
I'm sorry. I also have a bunch of questions about the Twitter conference.
Okay.
So, on which day is it going to be actually?
This conference is going to be on the equinox, the spring equinox,
March
20th. Yes. And it's a little bit different than most conferences because it goes I think it goes from 12 midnight GMT to 12 midnight GMT. So it's what they do is they start the conference in Europe, and then they move east, and then they go around the world. So it's like each time zone, it's optimal for each time zone. It's like during the middle of the day in each time zone or something. It's like a time when people can, attend, but not everyone's going to attend all sessions because sometimes it's going to be in the middle of the night. So it's like you go around the world and then they schedule people based on where they are, or where the person giving the presentation is going to be. And then, it'll be archived on Twitter. And actually, I think they have a proceeding now where they'll have everything archived.
All right.
I don't know what
And
the schedule
second
is. Yeah.
question actually would be whether we are going to like present in a round, so like passing the presentation, so to say, the microphone, or is it like more by one person, one speaker from our team, and we are just preparing the slides?
Well, I'll just do it from my Twitter account, which is where it's basically going to be. So but we'll put all the things together like beforehand, and it'll be like passing the microphone, putting it together, but it's just going to be from one account, and it's just a matter of like sending out tweets on that account.
All right, so you will be just posting tweets and not like really speaking.
Yeah, there's no speaking. It's just like messages.
Just that,
yeah.
All right. Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then it'll be archived, and then it'll be because people can't attend. It might be 3 a.m. for some people, and it might be right. And I don't know what the schedule is yet. They'll send out the schedule closer to the conference. But yeah, it's an interesting time. A lot of neuroimaging, if you're interested in neuroimaging, and like a lot of not a lot of computational stuff, but a lot of like there's some neurobiology too. So
Sounds cool.
Yeah. Let me go to the collective intelligence abstract real quick. So this is something Jesse and I are working on, and Jesse put a couple comments in here, and he mentioned this thing about different types of perspectives, affine and deformed, and I don't define them right off, so I'll define those. I have definitions written down, but I'll put them into this abstract. And then and then Jesse says, I'm excited to get a chance to work on this. So what we need from this, I think, is maybe just some copy editing, and like if you have questions about part of the approach, it's still kind of unorganized. Like I've got it into 3 categories here, which are the dark headings, and then
Okay.
And so this is kind of like going from like kind of establishing the problem to using a model to solve the problem, and then the interactions between what are called internal models or models within the brain. So the agent has a brain, and that's the internal model, and then it kind of talks about that. I mean, it needs more work, of course, but it's that's the basic structure. So definitely, if you have questions about things or things to add, references, please propose them in the just like a comment or something.
Yeah, it looks cool. I've obviously with everything else going on, it's been way in the back burner. But after, I think we're kind of getting close to done with the manuscript and then the Twitter stuff. So it's kind of, I had this moment this week where I'm like reorganized all of my different projects and things that I was supposed to be working on. It's like, okay, this is good now. But I look forward to getting to that probably the next. This one isn't due until like the end of the month, right?
It's March 1st is the deadline.
Okay. Yeah, so then everything I'll be saying more overtime on that for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so then that's that. And then we'll go to the manuscript for the last 15 minutes so that we can kind of, if it loads. All right. That's reloading. Okay, so yeah, thank you everyone for making the time to make comments. Z, I said before that you made some good changes. Thank you. I've got them, I think, in place now. Ankit, thank you for your comments. And Jesse, thank you for your comments. And Stefan is going to work on it in the next 2 weeks or so. He's got, I think his section is pretty good, but it's always good to go over it and see what to make sure it makes sense. Again, if it's confusing to someone else in the group, it's going to be confusing people outside the group. So we have the title, and I think there are a couple changes of the abstract where I had to clarify something. The introduction, and I noticed Jesse's kind of been going through copy editing. That's good. I made some of the accepted a lot of the suggestions. So we're going here. I think we're okay. Now we're down to the section with the embodied cognition, and this is, of course, this is the part Jesse and I are kind of doing a dialectical process here, where we're kind of going, kind of like proposing sentences and getting things in place, references. So I've put in references like this, and then I'm putting them at the end of the list, and then I'll renumber it when we're done. So like these will be numbered, but I don't want to renumber them until I have everything in place. So that's why they're like this.
Yeah, I think I feel like this is a lot more fleshed out, and I feel pretty good about it overall. I think there's been a few different revisions of where to put certain things or mention things. Like you mentioned Chimera. Is it Chimera or Chimera? I don't know.
I think Chimera, yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's a much better flow to it now, and I appreciate the things that you added for the other references. But I feel like between that and the generalized models of regulation below it, I feel like that's, at least as far as, I don't think there's any more to add to it. Maybe if there's anything, it might just be clarifying for things, but I feel like it's, do you think there's anything more that needs to be added to this section?
I think it's probably pretty good. I don't think we need to add any more. I think we're in good shape with this. I think we have like 3 paragraphs in embodied cognition, and I think we could do a pretty good job of laying it out. And then the generalized models of regulation, I think we have a pretty good handle on that. It's supposed to be like an introduction. It's not supposed to be a full-blown review. So right. I think we're in good shape.
Yeah.
So then.
But
all right, see something here. Okay. And then, so then we get into the methods. And so this is where I've been making some changes, and of course Z has offered his revisions, like moving things up into the methods from the results. And so I think those are appropriate. Definitely like, kind of making it flow a little bit more smoothly. We hope field network stuff was moved up. And then we're, let's see, yeah, about the figures. The figures are referenced. I had to move some things up here, so it's referencing figures down below. I might have to go through that and make sure it's right, but I think it is. And then the results. Oh, and then wait a minute. So where are we with this? We're in results. So I just wanted to point out too that Ankit deleted an equation, and so I agreed with that, and so now it reads a lot more smoothly. I think a lot less redundant. And then results. Oh, what do you want to say?
Yeah, that's what I felt when I commented.
Okay. Yeah. So then the results, we have, again, the software instantiation. So this is Broadgen Brain. And then that's what Stefan will work on. And then this is, of course, Ziyi again. Now with Ziyi, I combined one of the figures that he suggested. So he suggested combining 6 and 7 into a 6. So this is how I did it, just like shrunk down the figures and put them next to one another. So it's like left and right. So you can see, and it doesn't really, it doesn't really take away from each figure. They're actually, sort of in the same place now. So that's good. And then the BV collectives, which was, of course, Ankit. This was a use. Well, actually, this isn't the use case, but this is the BV collectives. So we went through this, and this is, of course, the screenshots. But now we have the animation, so I'll have to put that in as a. Oh, I need to change the figure number on that. But now we have sort of the supplemental video. So now I can reference that and say this is supplement. This is how this actually works in motion, because these are static shots. And then
so I would actually put like those GIFs or videos on Google Drive, and then you can reference them directly from here or something like that.
Yeah, you can do that. Just share them with me, and yeah. And then, all right, and then I'm just making a note here. And then so I need to kind of make sure the figures work here, because this is not numbered correctly, but that's okay. Then the discussion, of course, we went through this. Okay. And then feedback, regulation, and emergence. This section, I think we're kind of finished with it, but I can maybe add a little bit to the second paragraph. But I think, yeah, so Jesse said it's a very good rephrasing. So I think we're pretty good on this section. Use cases, of course, this is the 3 use cases, Z, Stefan, and I don't know if we need a little bit more on that, but I think it's probably pretty brief. And then Ankit's is cumulative classification, which, of course, was a little bit, it wasn't as straightforward as, because he talks about, like, deep learning and machine learning, and so I think Jesse suggested a change there in the syntax. And then this was, this note here, the plan was to present the stimulus as some form of identifiable stimulus. And I actually put this in as a sort of a write-up of that. So he gave her example of the dog barking. So check that over, make sure I have that correct, because I just kind of precise it. Yeah. And then this part I put some references in on, sort of collective behavior and this whole discussion. So this is that's that part. I think we're good on that. If this highlighted area makes sense to you, then we're okay. Yeah. And then limitations, I think we're done on that. And then the references, and again, I'll make a check on those before we submit. We have some references here. Okay, added content. That's good. And then so I was adding in extra references down here, alphabetizing them, but I'll work them into the number system. And so that's pretty much it. And I think we're in good shape. Again, like I said, I think Stefan, he'll have more to add when he gets a chance. And then I think Z, thank you for your changes. I think they're in pretty good shape. Jesse, thank you for all your work on going through the paper. And I think that's very good points. And Ankit, thank you for making the clarifications and making the videos. I think those will be useful. I think in your case, your platform isn't really fully understood unless you really have the dynamic, the animation part. So I think that'll work. And then, so then I think we're all set on that. And so next week and the week after, we'll kind of, we'll keep our eye on that on the paper, sort of in terms of dotting I's and crossing T's, going through again and making sure everything is right. And then by March 1st, we'll put it out as a preprint. And then we'll talk about where to submit it as a peer-reviewed article. And then we'll talk about, promoting it at the Twitter conference. We'll work on the slides. And then we'll make a point of pointing to the paper and saying this is where we can find a lot more information. So the Twitter conference isn't going to be like exhaustive. It's just going to be like a taste. And then the paper will be something people can go to read about.
Yeah. And actually, I went through the paper yesterday, like the whole paper, like you said, from start to end, and it seemed like making sense through the whole part. So I'm just convinced that it seems like a good site.
Okay, Devansh, did you have any comments or observations? I don't know if he's still there.
Yeah, seems good.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments, observations?
I would just say I really like it. I think it's come along, and I did a lot of I kind of went through the paper again, although not entirely, and I really haven't looked at. I haven't really touched any of the method stuff, but even for like grammar or anything like that at all. But I'll probably go through it again. Now, last night I pretty much just finished going through the parts that I was mostly focusing on, like the regulation stuff, and then at the end, I think that's very good. There are a few things like I feel like I should maybe for my own this is more of a tangent comment. Maybe even for my own interest or whatever, there are a few things I would almost like to go over in like a separate discussion to the paper, because just for like my own interest or think future project or things that I'm curious about, because there are a lot of things that could be inserted to put in here, but that would are not necessarily relevant, and I don't think anything else needs to be added to the paper, from at least from what I've been looking at and working on. I feel like it's pretty complete given the space and the time and what we're talking about. But there are like some other like follow-up stuff that will be very interesting to kind of go over separately, probably maybe even after we submit it or whatnot. But it's kind of a note about that. Like I think I put a few comments in different places about that. Or wrote them in my own notes or something like that. That said, I feel like I'm pretty much done with what I have to add to it, but I will go over it for copy editing and kind of, I'll probably go through it again and put comments like, does this make sense, or could this be worded differently? And I don't mean anything by those things. It's just as copy editing and writing and putting papers out there, I've just raised those questions, and feel free to comment on them or ignore them as necessary. So that's all.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'd suggest that if you have a bunch of things that you want to follow up on, kind of make your own list on in a document, and then kind of walk through them. Maybe we can talk about in the meeting. What kinds of things do you think are follow-up issues? that we can like talk about. And then, you know, we don't have to follow up on everything, but just to have a list and to think about like what would be a good follow up. You know, maybe there's something that's an outstanding issue. Maybe it's not really plausible, but it's interesting. So, okay. Well, it's the top of the hour, so thank you for attending. Thanks to everyone for showing up and participating. And if you don't have any more comments, we'll see you next week. All right, talk to you later. Bye.
All right, see you next.